John F. Wilson, better known as Jack Wilson, was born April 2, 1919 in Salt Lake City, Utah, and was raised on a cattle ranch in western Utah. It was on that ranch where Jack first encountered wildfire when he was about 10 years old. Subsequent years saw more fire on and around the ranch, but he had no idea at the time that he would later have a profound effect on wildfire management in the nation.
When I was about 16, I was living out on the ranch and we had a fire. We jumped in our little old pickup and ran up, and there were only 3 of us to fight this fire, but 10 miles away there was a civilian conservation corps camp. So we got sent some help out there, and they came, and that was the first time I had ever seen organized firefighting. I thought it was wonderful. And we didn't have very good tools. We had shovels and axes and saws, but that was it. But we put the fire out, and I always thought that was kind of a fun thing to do. I went to high school at Park City, here on this side of the mountain. From there I went down here to BYU because I had an uncle that lived on about 20 miles over here in Payson that had the largest chicken ranch in the country. He put out about 10,000 eggs a day. And so I earned my way through school here by cleaning up the chicken coops and harvesting the eggs every day and washing and cleaning them. So that's kind of where my education at basics comes from. My education was cut short by the Japanese when they bombed Pearl Harbor. That was the 7th of December, and on the 12th of January I went down and signed up for the Air Force. So I spent 5 years in the U.S. Air Force. I had counted on living on the ranch and being a cowboy the rest of my days because that's what I really liked. But the the Dugway Proving Grounds moved in and kicked us off of our winter range, so we lost the ranch. And I went down to the post office in Park City, and there was a poster there advertising BLM was hunting employees, so I signed up, and I was fortunate. I was selected and started my career at the BLM in Rawlins, Wyoming.
Jack began his career with the Bureau of Land Management as a range conservationist in Rawlins, Wyoming in December 1948, a mere 2 years after the BLM had been created through a merger of the United States Grazing Service and the General Land Office. He moved to Pinedale, Wyoming as an area manager 4 years later in 1952, and back to Rawlins as district manager in 1954. In 1958, he moved to Burley, Idaho as district manager, where he would stay for 10 years before moving in 1968 to serve as district and land office manager in the California Desert District. Throughout these years, Jack's knowledge of resource management, including fire, broadened and grew deeper.
I started out, as I said, in Rawlins, Wyoming as a range conservationist, the bottom of the ladder. You had to have a college degree and experience in natural resources. BYU was a little lacking it in that particular area, but anyway, it must have been hard up time because I was hired there. And I worked as a range conservationist, GS5, every other month, every other week. Paycheck was $124. I moved up the ladder to be It was district manager. They called us district managers there. And I was there only very few months, and they shipped me back to Rawlins, a higher grade. Now I was clear up to a GS9. That's where I pretty well got started up the ladder. I liked it okay in Rawlins. It was a very tough job, and we had a lot of varied experience: range, watershed, timber, fire, all kinds of things of that nature. I fought quite a few little fires out of Rawlins, but in 1954, we had what we called the Wheatland Fire, which was over on the Laramie Peak area. It was adjacent to the Medicine Bow National Forest. This was a big, rough, dirty fire. It burned over our fire camp, and we lost a couple of fire engines and had a tremendous number of tools stolen. But we got the fire out. That's the first time I'd ever been on a big fire. And I thought that was really quite a challenge. I did the same kind of work in Burley when I came there, but it was a much more favorable thing. Our major efforts in business was livestock, cattle, and that's where I learned about good people and hard work and treachery. When it came to Rawlins, or Burley, I found a whole different situation. They had flash fields, a lot of cheatgrass, and some pretty high timber country too, and we had lots of fires at Burley District. So that's where I gained most of my firefighting experience. Well, we had some very big fires, I'll tell you. Cheatgrass fires run very fast. We developed some techniques and whatnot to get them. We had bulldozers and road graders and stuff like that, and fire engines. But our major and crews, we organized a fire division, which consisted of a bulldozer, two engines, and then one 20-man crew. And that was it. That was our firefight initial attack group, and we'd then bring in a different division. We had a capability of 3 divisions, and we had to go to Shoshone and Idaho Falls and Boise to get help. I don't know if you know the area south of Twin Falls. There's a range of mountains along the south border of the Nevada line. About halfway up of it's Forest Service. The lower half is BLM and some private land, state land. And we had a fire down in there start. It was a pretty mean fire. BLM pushed everything we could up there, and we couldn't, it was getting away from us. We were fighting our hearts out and losing the battle. And I looked up on the horizon, and there was a whole green line of Forest Service, fire engines, bulldozers, everything else. Says, come on down and help us. It says, we can't help you till it crosses the forest boundary. I decided, boy, that's really sad. That kind of is part of my training, and all of us are better than any of us. I worked with the sawtooth forest after that. We worked out our problems, so we did help each other. And that was the thing. All the way through my career, I started living in Rawlins. There were only 3 of them. We had 2 people in the Forest Service. Our ranger had 1 guy. We'd fight each other's fires. Well, if it got big, the wall went up. Forest Service brought theirs in and sent ours out. And we did the same. When I went to Southern California, I had a completely different assignment. The 17 million acre California desert which is like the southeast quarters of Southern California. One of my friends, a long-term supervisor, Russ Penny, was the state director of California, so I was under him as district manager at Riverside. And he wanted us to plan the outlook and what we should do for the California desert. So I spent 4 years working hard on the California desert plan. I also got some darn good fire experience there too, because California had big fires. I got acquainted very early in the game with the state of California's fires, and they were really top hands. But I also got acquainted with the folks that fought the fires in the cities. So I got a lot of good experience there, and I was on several big fires. And I did get up to a GS-12 there. I went from there to Riverside, California, and I found out they have different fuel down there, houses. So I learned, I was on several bad fires in Southern California. We had one particularly bad one near San Diego, almost burned into the town, but we were able to stop that fire. After 4 years in California, which I come to dearly love, I was surprised when they moved me back to the Boise Interagency Fire Center.
In 1972, Jack began his tenure at the Boise Interagency Fire Center, BIFC, in Boise, Idaho. Although the fire center had been planned and developed during earlier years and formally dedicated as operational in 1970, only a few buildings were on the 50-plus acre campus, and interagency operations were still relatively new. Jack started as the BIFC director, following in the footsteps of the first director, Bob Robinson, a man Jack called a legend. From 1981 to 1987, Jack served concurrently as the director of BIFC and the Office of Aircraft Services, before turning his full focus to BIFC. During his 20 years at BIFC, he fostered growth, the inclusion of new partners, and interagency cooperation. Jack led the way in creating a foundation and transition to a national center before retiring in 1992. A year later, the word national replaced Boise in the facility's name, and NIFC became a nationally recognized fire coordination center. In 1994, a new headquarters building was officially named the Jack Wilson Building in his honor.
When I came to Boise, I was a GS-13. I didn't apply for the job at the fire center. The way the BLM did it then, it was the state directors would meet in a session, and I later became in that group. We'd sit there and hash it over and decide who we wanted and who would move where. And I got the call there. It was late summer of 1971 that I got tapped to go to Boise. The director of the fire center at Boise strangely kind of hinged back on something I did when I first went to Burley, and ran across these Indian crews over in Oregon. Not Indian, Spanish-American crews in Oregon. The Wheatland Fire, I had the Southwest Indians, I ran across them as crews. So I was really starting to learn a lot about the people that fought the fires, but not an awful lot about the management of them. The only management was to get them out as best you could with whatever you had. Bob Robinson was the first director of the fire center. Bob was a legend in his own right, and he also was the man that started the Alaska Fire Service. So I was following a real pro, and I learned a lot from Bob. And I inherited what he was able to put together And he was at the fire center. It was first set up in 1969. So we had about 4 years there, and what he had done was he had built the core of what later became the National Interagency Fire Center. He built 3 big, nice buildings, and the one that I was in the first longest time was the one closest to the city, and we had a warehouse and 2 buildings for holding these true teams and put them together. The formation of the Boise Interagency Fire Center was rather interesting. When I first went to Burley, I thought it'd be a nice idea if because we had a lot of cheatgrass in all that area, Oregon, eastern Oregon, southern Idaho, western Utah, clear down into northern Arizona, lots of cheatgrass. And I suggested maybe it'd be a good idea to have a center that fought cheatgrass fires. Well, I heard no more about that for a long time, but I also remember that Merle Loudon, who was the Forest Service chief and had a great interest in firefighting and a cooperative efforts. So I was real surprised when I went to the fire center. I was doubly surprised when Merle Loudon sent his number 2 man there to the fire center, Bob Bjornsen, BJORNSEN, to head up the Forest Service. So what we had at the fire center at that time was 3 organizations, BLM, Forest Service, and the Weather Service. That was all. What I really had was on one end of the runway we had a retardant plant, that was the Forest Service. On the other end of the runway we had another retardant plant, which was BLM. Then I went in the warehouse and I found a big green strip paint across the middle of the floor in the warehouse. On one side it was all Forest Service tools, on the other side it was all BLM tools, and they were all the same. So I finally convinced them that maybe we should get rid of those, because all throughout my career with the fire, I believed that all of us were better than any of us. And I'd always join in and help them when they'd let me. And so I had kind of in my blood the theory that we should be able to have some way that we could put it all together. And that was, I don't know why I was sent to Boise. I was never given any instructions or anything else. I just walked in the door and see what I had and fix up what I could. The Forest Service, for instance, had in their dispatch office, they had BLM's dispatcher in this room, Forest Service dispatcher in this room, Boise National Forest dispatcher in that room. I thought, this is ridiculous. After great efforts, we were able to get the Boise District, or the Boise National Forest dispatcher moved into a separate office, and we got the BLM and the Forest Service dispatchers in the same room. We had aircraft. BLM had a contract Electra, a 4-engine aircraft to haul people back and forth. We had it here. Forest Service had a 4-engine aircraft in Missoula, and it was always a squabble to see who was going to haul the troops. But the biggest barrier with it all was that we didn't have an organization that could be interchanged. BLM and Forest Service, most of the other agencies used the large fire system, the large firefighting system. He had a fire chief, and he had deputy, and then he had line bosses and crew bosses and squad bosses and whatnot. Cities, counties, most others didn't have anything like that. They had the chief, the deputies, I don't know, whatever everybody called them. This was a hard battle, but we finally were able to put together, the fact this crew, and I talked after the 1975 fires, came up with what they call the incident command system, or a plan for that incident command system. This took us about 5 years to develop and get the agencies, because the agencies fought about it. They didn't want to change their systems. But they finally realized that if they were going to be getting help, because fires were getting very costly, they needed to do something like that. So the incident command system was put together. Once we got it in functioning and the people found how well it worked, they all adopted it. All the things, not only is it fire now, it's floods, it's hurricanes, everything else, use the incident command system. So that's kind of where I started in the fire game at the fire center. We had 17 people, permanent types, and we had, I think about 45 maybe, people that worked part of the year, part-time fire people. That was the organization we had to work with. Forest Service relied on the Boise National Forest for everything they got, and they swapped around among themselves. They had major centers, like Region 1 in Montana had a big warehouse in Missoula. Region 5, which is California, had a big warehouse in Redding. Region 6, which was Oregon, had a big warehouse. I decided we had to work together. That was my whole job, to get together and plant. And now when Bob came, Bob Bjornson, we both had the same. He'd gone up the Forest Service ranks. He was up about, he was GS 14. I think it was rather inherent. Forest Service was whole efforts were toward big timber. That was the major thing they were interested in. That was their specialties. Whereas BLM was more oriented toward the desert, the rangelands, the cheatgrass, and the sagebrush, and different fuels, different methods of fighting the fires, things like that. So there were reasons. We have BLM had timber also, but outside of Omni, Oregon and California, which had big timber, BLM really didn't have any major timber areas they fought in. And when they did, we had to pull the Forest Service in to help us, because we weren't very expert fit with timber fires. Well, the first thing I started really hitting hard, I had the organization I inherited was 3 divisions. The one that operated on, what do they call it? One of them was Division of Training. One of the division was Standards. Standards and Training was the one division. Administration was the other division, and the third division was the, anyway, it was the dispatchers and things like that. That time we had, in those offices, there was probably three dispatchers, one of them for material, one of them for aircraft, and one of them for supplies and whatnot. A BLM guy, Jim Thurston was his name, decided that the Office of Aircraft Services would control all aircraft, agency aircraft in the Department of Interior, and Forest Service, and parks if they used them, Indians. But aircraft services went on the route. We, instead of having them, they would go out and contract for them, and we'd pay them. I didn't like it because they moved over in the area telling us how to use the aircraft and whatnot. I mean, us being the firefighters and fighting the fire. And so it's supposed to be aircraft services, and my had problem is they weren't serving us. They were trying to tell us how to do things. So they're still in existence. I had a 5-year. They called me in 1981. Don Hodel was the secretary. Called me to head up the Office of Aircraft Services, 120-day detail, because the guy that was in charge of it was conservative, running across some fiscal problems with the government. Well, that 120 days wound up to being 5 years. So I had both agencies for 5 years, the Office of Aircraft Services and the BLM. And I didn't like it, but I got through it. Now these are all composed of a member from each one of the major agencies. I was from BLM, or from the Fire Center. So was Bob Bjornson. Hank DeBruin, he had appointed one from his office. Fish and Wildlife had one, Parks had one. About 10, 12 people really came in that. Then we run into the problem with that system in the fact that it works fine on a fire, but what if you're fighting a major fire in a political area, a county, a state, something like that? How are you going to relate that to that? So what we did is we have levels of incident command systems. The first one is the one that fights the fires. The second one bumps up to 2 or 3 levels, like a city and a county and another agency. And we have, I think, four levels now of incident command. Incident command may have 2 or 3 ICUs, and they start out on the ground with I think a level 2. These are how well they're trained, how skilled they are. Somehow, many years before that, but never really folded into it for a long time, was the fact that the hot shops were formed in California when I was down there. I had nothing to do with it, but it was formed. So this became the manpower. Before that time, we were getting our manpower by going to the agencies. Everybody in the agency had to go fight the fires, and we had fellows up there that didn't belong there. So we went in and developing a standard for physical capability, physical training and whatnot. A step test came into existence. If you couldn't pass a step test, you couldn't go on the fire line, because we were getting fellows who were 60 years old and 200 pounds overweight, and they were dying on us. So we did that. That was another part of the incident command system. That's where we are today. So it's all pulled together. One of the best compliments I had, that was a couple of summers ago. We had a big fire up around Sun Valley. And some lady, I was just walking down the street, and some lady recognized me and said hello. And she said, I want to thank you. I owe you a great debt. And I couldn't think what she was talking about. She said, I went into the fire camp on this fire, and there were fire engines from 4 agencies, the county and the city. Thank you for making it possible that you could all put stuff together. So that was the highest compliment I ever got. And I didn't know the lady or anything about her, so I was glad of that one. When you get a level 2 team on the fire, they have much better equipment, more appropriate equipment, more firefighters. They changed leadership. Otherwise, when they bring in a level 2 team now, they have a new fire boss. And I was just blessed very much in my time at the fire center, and I had some. And that was what I did. I went out and find good people. I tell them everybody's important. Here's your job, and I'd say, if you need some help, I'll try to find it for you, but you do your job. So that's how I run the fire center. Everybody's important, and I think I proved it. And Tim Murphy was very good at that too. He knows everybody on the base, always visits with them. Some of the others we had before that didn't seem to think the people were worth a damn. And it doesn't matter what grade you were, you know. If you were a guy that was mowing the lawn or the chief dispatcher, they were all important. When you get up in the higher levels of politics, it gets nasty. That's how we have a level 4. They work primarily on the politics. Like that's a big disaster, like a big typhoon or something that covers a lot of country. You have to have something like that. They do funny things. For instance. In that big typhoon a few years ago and hit New Orleans, they couldn't get into the airport because the airport was closed. The airport was closed because they had no communications. So what do? We sent an incident command team in there. They brought in a unit, regular piece of their organization. It was radio equipment. Put it on the runway and started talking to the tower. So they opened the airport. So they do all kinds of funny things like that. We went to Russia on a train wreck one time, and not only do they have those systems now, but they also have satellite capability on them. So we can kick up a satellite and doesn't go like the big satellites we have, but it's big enough that you can hit them from a lot of angles. And we could then bring in more help.
During his career, Jack also earned advanced degrees at the University of Utah in computer science, the University of Montana in forestry, and at Pennsylvania State University in public administration. Jack also was awarded an Outstanding Lifetime Service Award from the Public Lands Council, among many other honors and recognition for his achievements. Although retired, Jack continued to work and assist during the fire seasons of 1992, 1994, and 1995. He remained a frequent visitor and familiar face at daily briefings during busy seasons up until 2014 or later.
After I retired, I went to work in the fire pit and done fire retardant. I mixed the mud they put in the bombers. I did that 2 years. One year we did 1.3 million gallons of retardant. That's the stuff you mix it in with water and the mud, the pretty red stuff you put on the ground, the retardant. It doesn't put fires out very often, but it does slow them down.
In many ways, Jack's greatest achievement may be in his leadership and the way in which he inspired those around him and those who would follow. He initiated a new age of interagency partnership and cooperation, prompting many to note that without Jack, there would be no National Interagency Fire Center. His legacy can be seen today across the NIFC campus and in his namesake building, where 8 federal agencies work together to coordinate the national mobilization of firefighting resources and provide leadership for fire managers everywhere. Jack's legacy will continue long into the future.